Welcome folks. What I'm going to be showing you today in this second part for this high energy ignition distributor was how to remove it from the engine, and what to be watching out for when you do remove it, because when it comes time to put this thing back in, it can be a real headache if you don't pay attention to how it came out in the orientation as to how it sits in the engine. Now on this side of the distributor here is where the front of the engine was, out this way. So if you imagine the top of your video, the engine is sitting, remember we're in a van, so I can actually see right on top of this once you take the engine cover, aka doghouse, off there. Whereas in a car, you know, it's pretty hard to get your head back there because of the hood and the vehicle being a car and such. But anyways, I'm going to show you the orientation and the way this thing came out and what to be watching out for, so that when it comes time to reinstall it, especially considering the helical gear that's at the bottom of this thing that's meshing with the matching helical gear on the camshaft, the rotor inside will turn when you're either extracting it or taking out the distributor from the engine or putting it back in. So the orientation that I had is first, if you got a cell phone, smartphone, take pictures of the thing or make notes. I just made notes myself. But this one, when it was sitting in the engine, this is actually perpendicular 90 degrees to the center line of the engine, being the crankshaft. The crankshaft and the camshaft was this way. The engine is in the front, remember. I got a close-up here, so it's hard to really show you exactly on the workbench. But this is pretty much the way it sat before I started to undo the hold-down clamp and take the bolt out in order to take the distributor out of the engine. So it's pretty much straight across on this one. And if you look at the vacuum advance canister, it was pointing at about 45 degrees out this way, and the vacuum hose going to the carb to actuate this thing was out going on to this side here. In order to make sure that everything is going to be set up the way you want it to, not just basically, you know, taking the hold down clamp and removing the thing and then you don't know where the heck you were when it comes time to come back, is what you have to do is take the for safety's sake, take the negative cable off your battery. So when you start to turn the crankshaft in order to line up the rotor for number one cylinder firing, which is what I'm going to show you next, is you got to do the safety thing first. If you're down there turning a wrench, breaker bar ratchet with an extension and a socket on the end of the crankshaft bolt there, pulley harmonic balancer, you don't want the thing to inadvertently start up and start breaking arms and things. So safety is the utmost importance here. Okay, so let's go now. Enough of that. Okay, so I'm going to remove the cap and show you what the orientation of the rotor is inside. First you have to remove the battery supply wire from here, which isn't on here now. It's still part of the vehicle right now. So you just basically, it's a clip, you just disconnect it and put it to the side in a safe place. And there's this other clip with the 3 wires that goes to the base of the distributor itself. In order to remove the cap, you have to get those 2 connectors out of the way. So we'll lift the cap off now and see what we're up to. Alright, so this one you can see where it's pointing. Okay, if you noticed, I put a white piece of masking tape on this terminal, which is actually for the number 1 spark plug wire. Basically, if this thing is installed correctly, for the most part that should be pointing towards number 1 cylinder. And on a 350 cubic inch 5.7 liter Chevy V8, number 1 cylinder is at the front. Okay, if you're sitting in the driver's seat, it's the front left of the vehicle. Okay, so that's pointing in the right direction, and so you got to watch and make sure that this thing is on the compression stroke. When you're, how can I put this? The rotor tip has to be pointing at the same terminal I showed you where the tape was. It has to be on the firing number 1 cylinder on the top dead center of the compression stroke, rather. So what you'd have to do is get into I just actually, with this one with the low compression, probably worn out engine, I just got my thumb and I pushed down on the fan belt, and I had a fairly rigid fan behind the radiator, and I just kept turning it over until I got it going to the right place. So you just have to turn it around until on the crank damper on the front of the engine, got my hand in the frame here, is you just turn it slowly and you'd watch this rotor and it'd have to line up with where I was showing you. You can put a mark, much as I have here. I've got 3 little lines in a felt pen here. I don't know if it'll show up on the video, but once that rotor is there and you're on your harmonic balancer, the mark that's in your harmonic balancer is pointing to top dead center on your timing tab or indicator, depending on your kind of engine. You just basically crank this over, and I'm going to simulate this now. So I'm on the front of the engine, let's pretend for a minute. So I'm starting to crank the engine, the crankshaft rather. Breaker bar, extension in a socket, and I'm slowly turning, slowly turning. You could have a friend watch this, but I mean you're going to be one or the other. On the firing of the number 6 cylinder, it's going to be exactly 180 degrees across. So if your rotor's pointing on this side here, you're 180 degrees out, and it's firing number 6 cylinder on top dead center. So you want this one pointing to where your number 1 wire was on your cap, right? So you just keep cranking on the bolting into your crankshaft, keep turning it slowly, and once you reach that and you're top dead center, I'm looking at my crankshaft, at the front of the crankshaft rather, and I see that the groove in the harmonic balancer or damper, if you will, is right at top dead center, or 0 degrees, neither advanced or retarded. So now I know that this thing, when I pull it out, the distributor out of the engine, when I go back in, this has got to be pointing in the exact same orientation, pointing towards number 1 spark plug terminal on the distributor cap. So now that we've got that done, just leave the engine there. I would leave the battery disconnected in case someone decides to turn the key and make the engine revolve a little bit, which will really mess things up, start all over again. But this is if it's already been in the engine and it's been timed reasonably correctly. So now you'll notice when I start to extract this, there's a helical gear on the bottom. I'll show you that in a minute. But as you lift the distributor out of the engine, this rotor will turn. What I've noticed with this one, I did it really slow, and what I got here was about a 45-degree turn. In other words, this rotor rotated about 45 degrees, and then it stopped once the helical gear on the end of the distributor was clear of the helical gear that was on the camshaft. So that's another thing to be watching for when you reinstall this thing, is you have to have the orientation right to start with. So you back it up about 45, just a bit more than 45 degrees, and when you put it back in, the helical gear on the bottom of the distributor drive shaft here will actually turn it down until you get to a point where it's seated, and it'll come right back to where you were if you did it correctly. So I'm just going to simulate that as I lift this thing up. It might be a bit shaky, but I'll do my best. So I'm lifting this thing up now, and because of the helical gear on, there's a gear with an angle, the teeth are cut at an angle. As you extract this thing, it'll come up, it'll come up, it'll come up, and as soon as it gets free of the helical gear on the camshaft, you're about 45 degrees, okay? A little bit more than 45 degrees. So once you're clear of that, so just remember that when you go back in with this thing, the orientation of the vacuum diaphragm canister. What else can I say without flipping it over at this point in time? Also, the mark, you should actually, before you extract it, is to, I center punched a mark on the, actually I can flip it quickly. Probably, I don't know if it'll show on the video, but I got a little dimple here, and I also put a matching dimple right under it. I believe it was on the intake manifold where this thing goes through the hole and down into the rest of the engine block there. Another note while I'm thinking about it, there's a drive tang on the bottom of this inside. It's the end of the actual shaft for the distributor, and there's a split pin or a spring pin in here that connects the gear to the actual shaft that's the main shaft for the distributor itself. And when you put this thing back in, if you take a flashlight and look down into the engine, you'll see where this little tang is. You can see that it's like a screwdriver tip that's within the counter bore of this of the drive gear here, the extension on the drive gear here. When you're going back in with the distributor, remember we're upside down. Take a note before you put the distributor back in, or even when you take it out, is shine a flashlight down in there. And if you're dealing with the car, like I say, I'm in a van, so I can stick my head right over there, right over the top, and look down with a flashlight. But if you can't get your head above the distributor, then you can use a mirror and find out what the orientation of the slot is in the drive shaft for the oil pump. It'll be like a little shaft with a groove in it, and this has to mate with that when it goes in. If you find you're putting your distributor back in and it doesn't go in that slot that's in that drive shaft that's down in the engine that drives the oil pump, this thing, the distributor body, will not seat in the engine. Okay, so it's very important I take my time to show you how to do this. And like I'm saying, when you either put this thing in or take it out, I can actually show you going back in again. You'd look down inside the engine, get a flashlight if you can see down in there. I did see on this one in the van. you look down there and you'll see the shaft down there, pretty much the full depth of this part from where the shoulder is on the bottom of the housing here. And so you're going down that far, and that's, well, looks like about 9 inches just off the top of my head. So you shine a flashlight, find the orientation of that drive shaft for the oil pump, and then as you're going down, that's got, like I say, it's got a mate. So if you left it where it was when it came out, it'll go right back in there. But say if for some reason you're putting a new distributor in or something like along those lines, or you just didn't do things right, then you got to make sure that you can get a long screwdriver type bar or whatever, and you can actually go down in there and turn it a little bit until you get it. So this thing, when you start to reinstall the distributor, it goes in freely. You can't use any force whatsoever. It's got to go in nice and easy. Alright? So when you're going back down in again, the orientation of I always like to use the vacuum advanced diaphragm, the unit here, or you can use the wiring depending on your distributor. And as you go back down again, okay, you're starting it down and you've got that, you didn't touch the oil pump drive shaft like when I reinstall this back in the vehicle, then it's just a matter of putting this at a 45 degree and putting this just back here 45 degrees, a little bit better than 45 degrees back from where it's going to end up. This one was set at about 5 degrees before top dead center when it was installed, so I know that's probably what I'm going to end up when it goes back in, when I line everything back up again. So as you go back down in there, the helical gear on the end of the distributor drive shaft and the helical gear that's part and parcel of the camshaft, once they start mating, then the helical gear on the distributor end here will start to rotate the rotor. As you go down, okay, it's going to start turning and turning and turning. Like I say, you're going to get to about a little over 45 degrees by the time you hit bottom there. So it's going to, as you're going down, and then you'll end up there. Okay, I got it marked. It's just a ballpark kind of a look, just to give you an idea what to be looking out for. So this particular one, the vacuum advanced canister, was at 45 degrees. And the rotor was pointing at the number 1 terminal on the cap. So now I've got that, and I've lined up those punch marks I was telling you about, or you could use some paint chalk, as long as it doesn't get rubbed off. Something that's permanent is good, because then you've always got that if you're using the same distributor. So then you're putting the cap back on, you just make sure there's the number 1 cylinder for the spark plug wire there. The rotor's pointing towards that number 1 cylinder terminal there. So then once you clamp it down there and get everything else hooked all back up, your battery hooked up, then you can fire the thing up, warm it up, and you're going to be really close on your timing just to fire it up. A lot of times a guy will throw in a distributor and doesn't know where it's at, and it's backfiring and doing all kinds of strange things. It's not very good for the engine either. So that's basically about it for this video. And just to basically give you a heads up, and it's going to save you a lot of headaches if you take your time when you remove this thing and make some notes, take some pictures with your smartphone, cell phone, what have you, instant camera, whatever you got. Okay, so check the order. I'll just recap. This particular one, the top housing for the distributor was exactly perpendicular to the center line of the engine. The crankshaft and the camshaft was this direction, so it was exactly straight across. This one's going to be easy to remember. You might have one that's off a little bit, but this particular one, like I say, it was set at 5 degrees before top dead center for the initial timing. And make a note of where everything is pointing, okay? This in particular, and if you do have a vacuum advanced diaphragm on your distributor, then you can use that as an orientation. You can put a paint or chalk mark on the engine, a piece of tape, whatever you got. Just make sure the engine's cold when you do it. Okay, so then that's about it. Just make sure that you know where everything's at when you take it out. So like I say, I'll just say one more time before I sign off here, is when it's going back in, you know where it's supposed to end up. You're going to end up here. In this particular one, I'm going to be 45 degrees, a little bit better than 45 degrees when I eyeballed it coming out. So I'm going to start it here when I put it back in the engine, when I finish making this video series. And as it's going down, this rotor will come back. I'll just show you once again with my hand here quickly. And as it goes down, and once it hits rock bottom and you can't go any further, it's going to stop right there, and that should be right at the number 1 spark plug wire terminal on the distributor cap. And that's as easy as it can get, and I don't know if I can really explain it any easier than that, but a lot of guys, a lot of people for that matter, they'll just pull a distributor out if they're, you know, in a hurry, and then, oh geez, it's time to get it back in again. Where the heck was I when it was installed and working properly before I took it out to replace parts or make a modification or two, you know. So there you have it, folks. That's about as far as I'll go today, and in order to help you out is just watch how you took it out. Like I say, make a mark where the distributor touches down on top of your intake manifold. Or one more thing I'll mention, Oldsmobile, you'll probably find that everything's on the opposite way, and it's probably the rotor is spinning anti-clockwise. With a Chevy, it's usually always, the rotor's always spinning clockwise. Okay, here's another little thing I thought about. I should mention it now. It's a little kind of a rhyme thing. In will determine the direction of spin. So if you have a vacuum advanced canister on there, in direction of spin. Just like if you were going to shoot water in there, it'll spin it this way. Okay, so if your vacuum advanced canister is on the other side, such as an Oldsmobile, the rotor should be spinning the other direction. So that's about it for today, folks. Just to help you out and probably save you a few headaches just by taking a little extra time and paying attention to what you're doing when you take one of these distributors out of your engine. So, with all that said and done, have yourself a nice day, and bye for now.